In the news tonight, thousands of Christians marked Good Friday in Jerusalem's Old City by walking the Way of Sorrows, tracing the route Jesus walked. At least 14 people were killed in the Syrian city of Hims when a bomb went off outside a mosque following Friday prayers. And Algerian President Abdelaziz Bouteflika, already in power for 15 years, won re-election after a vote opponents dismissed as a staged managed fraud to keep the ailing leader in power. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. Here are the details. We begin here at home, where Air Force Lieutenant Hazem Ahmed Dogan al-Matar was laid to rest today in the town of Mshaggar in Amman. Al-Matar died yesterday when an F-5 Royal fighter jet crashed during a routine training sortie. Attending the funeral procession was Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Lieutenant General Mishal Zebin, Commander of the Air Force, and a number of senior Army officers. Dozens of activists staged a sit-in in front of Al-Husseini Mosque in downtown Amman, in which they called for political and economic reform to improve citizens' standards of living. The protesters also called for achieving social justice, fighting corruption, and for eradicating poverty and unemployment. A similar protest took place in the southern governorate of Al-Karak. Thousands of Christian locals and pilgrims marked Good Friday by walking the Way of Sorrows in Jerusalem's Old City. The faithful traced the route they believe Jesus walked, carrying his cross to where he was crucified more than 2,000 years ago. Along the route, crowds stopped to pray at the various stations of the cross, which mark significant points in Christ's journey. The procession finished at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where the last 5 stations of the cross are located. This year, Western and Orthodox Christians celebrate Easter on the same dates. Christian Easter celebrations culminate on Sunday, the day that believers say Jesus rose from the dead. And at St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican, Pope Francis led a service to mark Good Friday. The Pope presided at a Passion of the Lord service, the first of 2 papal events on the day Christians commemorate Jesus' death by crucifixion. He will later take part in a nighttime ceremony marking the stations of the cross at Rome's Colosseum. Tomorrow, the Pope celebrates an Easter Eve service at St. Peter's Basilica. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry met UN Special Representative for Syria Lakhdar Brahimi, where talks focused on Syria's devastating civil war. Brahimi said that a deal between trapped fighters and civilians in Hims and the Syrian authorities had broken down as government forces appeared close to retaking the besieged opposition area. The deal, agreed at peace talks in Geneva this year, allowed some civilians to leave, but further negotiations broke down following heavy fighting this week. In a statement issued yesterday, Brahimi expressed his deep regret that negotiations were brutally stopped and violence was now rife again. And on the ground, a powerful car bomb went off outside a mosque in Hims, killing at least 14 people and leaving dozens others wounded. Syrian state television said the bomb went off as people left prayers at Bilal al-Habashi Mosque and blamed rebels for the attack. Today's attack coincides with a crushing offensive by government forces aimed at retaking the last rebel bastions in Hims. The state news agency Sana said government troops continued their progress against the rebels in the old Hims city, namely in the neighborhoods of Bab Houd and Wadi Sayeh, destroying rebels' positions and killing many. Algerian President Abdelaziz Bouteflika, who has been in power for 15 years and is confined to a wheelchair, has won a 4th term with 81.5% of the votes. His closest rival, Ali Ben Flies, came second with 12.18% of votes cast. National turnout was almost 52%, down from 75% turnout for Bouteflika's last win in 2009. 6 opposition parties boycotted the vote, saying it would not reform a system mostly closed to change. 77-year-old Bouteflika was already widely expected to win with the backing of the powerful ruling Front Liberation National FLN party. The FLN has dominated the political system since independence from France in 1962. Russia said it was disappointed with the United States' assessment of an international deal to defuse the crisis in Ukraine, saying the threat of new sanctions against Moscow was completely unacceptable. And in a further bid to defuse protests, Ukraine's acting president and the prime minister offered some of their strongest pledges to strengthen constitutional rights to use the Russian language. But armed pro-Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine said they would not move out of public buildings they have seized until the Kiev government stepped down. Here's an update.
Dashing hopes of progress raised by a diplomatic deal in Geneva, pro-Russian separatists who occupied government buildings in more than 10 Ukrainian cities said they will not leave them until the country's interim government resigns. The Geneva Agreement signed by the United States, Russia, Ukraine and the European Union called on all sides to refrain from violence, intimidation and provocative action. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry warned of more sanctions if Russia failed to act.
We fully expect the Russians, as they said they would here today, to demonstrate their seriousness by insisting that pro-Russian separatists who they've been supporting lay down their arms, leave the buildings, and pursue their political objectives through the constitutional processes that the agreement guarantees.
Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said all sides had agreed to turn away from violence in the hope of de-escalating the crisis.
We have no wish to put our armed forces in Ukraine on the territory of a friendly state, on the territory where our brothers live. This goes against the core interests of the Russian Federation.
Ukrainian's Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk promised pro-Russian separatists amnesty if they lay down their weapons and leave buildings they have occupied in eastern Ukraine. At a news conference in Kiev, following a four-party talks in Geneva, Ukrainian's Foreign Minister Andrei Deshtytsya said the next few days will show if Russia's promise to de-escalate was sincere.
I don't know the Russian intentions, but Minister Lavrov did promise that they want a de-escalation. So we'll see in a few days if it was a sincere promise and sincere participation.
Canada said it's sending 6 CF-18 fighter planes to the region to help bolster NATO. NATO has ruled out military involvement in Ukraine, but announced plans to send more ships, planes and troops to Eastern Europe to reassure other nations. Luay Balkar for the news at 10.
The captain of the sunken South Korean ferry was arrested this evening as one of the crew confirmed accounts that he was among the first to abandon the sinking ship. The focus on the crew members' final actions came after a third day of frustration, confusion and tragedy that brought no new breakthrough in attempts to rescue the nearly 300 passengers who remain missing. Investigators also didn't appear to be any closer to understanding why the ship made what it called a radical right turn shortly before it began to sink, a decision they think contributed to the sinking. Earlier in the day, the vice principal of a South Korean high school who accompanied hundreds of students on the ferry that capsized has committed suicide. Police said they found the 52-year-old hanging from a tree outside the gymnasium housing many of the survivors. The death of the principal is the 29th so far connected to the disaster. Of the 475 passengers and crew on the ship, about 340 were students and teachers. An avalanche swept down a slope on Mount Everest, killing 12 Nepali mountaineering guides in the single deadliest accident on Mount Everest. 3 other guides were injured, while up to 5 people were missing. With peak season just days away on Everest, Sherpas and guides were busy preparing for the trek, setting the ropes for the route and preparing the camps when the avalanche hit. Helicopters and rescuers on foot had been sent to the site. Every year, hundreds of climbers from around the world attempt to scale the more than 8,000-meter summit. A powerful 7.5 magnitude earthquake shook central and southern Mexico, sending panicked people into the streets. Windows broke and debris fell, but there were no reports of major damage or casualties. The quake was centered in the southwestern state of Guerrero, close to the Pacific beach resort of Acapulco. The U.S. Pacific Warning Center said it did not expect the quake to trigger a destructive tsunami. Colombians mourned the loss of their Nobel Prize laureate Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who died yesterday at the age of 87. Gabo, as he is affectionately known in Colombia, won worldwide fame for his magic realism novels, winning the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1982. His most famous work, 100 Years of Solitude, sold over 30 million copies worldwide. Among his other noted works are Love in the Time of Cholera and The General in his Labyrinth, which reconstructs the life of South American liberation hero Simón Bolívar. A Japanese firm has created an electric car which can float and move on water in case of flooding, making it an ideal vehicle for places prone to natural disasters. Claiming to be the world's smallest four-seat electric car, the FOM Concept 1 model measures 2.5 meters in length and weighs only 46 kilograms. And with a range of 100 kilometers between charges, it has a motorcycle-like steering system, allowing its driver to work the accelerator and brakes by hand. But most importantly, the car is capable of floating like a boat on water for 24 hours in the event of flooding, and is even able to move on the surface of water thanks to a water jet generator. The company plans to start production and sales of the vehicle in Thailand before continuing to enter Indonesia and other Southeast Asian countries. We begin with tennis and the Monte Carlo Masters. Rafael Nadal's 30-match clay court winning streak ended today when the world number one was stunned by fellow Spaniard David Ferrer, who beat him in a straight-set victory to reach the semi-finals. Six-seed Ferrer, who had beaten Nadal on clay once 10 years ago, executed a perfect game plan and relied on his devastating forehand to prevail in over 2 hours. With his 7-6, 6-4 victory, Ferrer will next face world number 3 and Australian Open champion Stanislas Wawrinka. In an earlier match, Swiss Wawrinka ousted Milos Raonic with a 2-set victory. Though the Swiss got off to a slow start, he soon was unstoppable as he outpaced the Canadian and won 7-6, 6-2. Reigning champions Bayern Munich officially lost their grip on the Champions League trophy, at least for a month, as UEFA President Michel Platini handed over the trophy to the 2014 final host city of Lisbon. Bayern are one of 4 teams left with a chance of winning the trophy in the final on May 24th. The German champions face Real Madrid in one semi-final on the 23rd, while Chelsea will face Atletico Madrid the day before. And finally, a quick look at the weather forecast. The kingdom will be affected by unstable weather tomorrow and the day after, though it will be relatively hot across the kingdom. A rise in temperature is expected tomorrow, creating hot conditions in most parts of the country. In the evening, local showers are expected, while winds will be southwesterly moderate, picking up at times and stirring dust in the Badia region. Further south, the Jordan Valley and the Gulf of Aqaba can definitely expect hot conditions, with temperatures reaching the high 30s. Here now is a look at temperatures forecast for tonight and tomorrow. And to close, here's a reminder of the day's top stories. Thousands of Christians marked Good Friday in Jerusalem's Old City by walking the Way of Sorrows, tracing the route Jesus walked. At least 14 people were killed in the Syrian city of Homs when a bomb went off outside a mosque following Friday prayers. And Algerian President Abdelaziz Bouteflika, already in power for 15 years, won re-election after a vote opponents dismissed as a stage-managed fraud to keep the ailing leader in power. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Alia Khan. Thank you for joining us. Have a good night, and I'll see you tomorrow.